Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Wrap, where we go through some of the more notable news of the week, but focus on something that requires more attention. Although I had to be honest, when I was compiling the list of things to discuss today, everything deserves an entire episode, but I'm trying to hang on to what little remains of my sanity. So we're not going to do that. Also, I've been thinking about this. The news cycles have been awful. Just sort of we've been inundated with news every week for years now. I think it's safe to say since 2016. But there seems to be this escalation of horrors. Not sure if that's an accurate um, perception or if it just feels like that because it's the stress of it all is cumulative. But it is quite something. Like even if it isn't objectively worse than it was a month ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, what have you, um, it's adding up. And I also do wanna preface the the news by saying, it's obviously so much better than it would have been because we're not getting generally speaking, we're not getting horrible news out of the Biden administration, although Republican-led states are doing their damnedest to to make up for that respite. Um, so I just wanna say that, this is a lot of this is stuff we can't do anything about. A lot of this is stuff that we do need to be aware of, though, and a lot of it are things that we need to keep in our minds so that we know we remember what we're fighting for, and then it comes down, when we get closer to election season, coming up with ways to fight the good fight. Okay. So this isn't to demoralize anybody. We do need to keep abreast of it though. And if it is overwhelming, please unplug. Not from the show, obviously. But over the weekend, just don't watch the news, don't read the news. Read a book, go for a walk, hug a tree, whatever. Whatever you find is most recuperative. And when I say go for a walk and don't listen to anything. Just be quiet, you know? It really will make a world of difference. And when I say read a book, I don't mean read a book about politics. Read a novel. I'm rereading all of Henry James's novels right now, and it's actually helping my brain heal a little bit, I think. Anyway, once again, of course, it's been something of a week. Uh, and it all seems of a piece with the new Republican project to demoralize us and undermine the systems that protect us. So in Indiana and Ohio, governors signed legislation that banned gender affirming care for trans children. And by the way, no children, no young children are getting surgery. They're not getting gender reassignment surgery. This kind of care just helps them understand what's going on, make them feel okay about what's going on, and support their choices and help them to make a transition later in life. Nothing irrevocable or dangerous is being done to these children. So that's just a lie that the right is telling. We've also learned that Ohio now prohibits adults from helping children cross state lines in order to access abortion services without parental consent, even if the parent whose consent is required is the parent who impregnated the child by raping them. On Actually, I'm going to leave that till later. Governor Greg Abbott, the fascist governor of Texas, is rushing to pardon a man named Daniel Perry, who just last week was convicted by a jury of his peers of murdering a protester at a racial justice rally. So he's a convicted murderer who it seems like with premeditation murdered another human being, and Abbott wants to protect him simply because the man killed somebody who was supporting Black Lives Matter, and of course because Greg Abbott's a sociopath. That's the simplest way to put it. Missouri's Republican-led House voted to defund, wait for it, public libraries. I guess because all the book bannings and book burnings weren't having the desired effect. So, I mean, they probably figured out by now that if you ban a book, it actually increases interest in the book and people buy it more, or more people buy it. So, just close all the damn libraries. The Fifth Circuit. Well, first of all, an activist judge named Matthew I'm not going to pronounce his name properly, and I should know at this point. Kaczmarek ruled that Mifepristone, also something I have very difficult time pronouncing, a drug that's 4 times safer than penicillin and something like 10 times safer than Viagra, should be banned across the country, even in states in which abortion is still legal. So the Fifth Circuit came in kind of to make things, well, definitely not better, if not entirely worse. So basically, they ruled on whether or not Judge Kaczmarek's ruling can take effect. And the results of this ruling were mostly bad. So first of all, good news, Mifepristone can stay on the market. However, the Fifth Circuit, in all of its infinite wisdom, reinstated a 7-year-old requirement that means a patient can only get the drug after 3 doctor's visits. For all of you who just have way too much time on your hands and want to go to the doctor 3 times for a medication you can currently just go into the pharmacy and buy. And you can't get it by mail anymore. So you have to go to the doctor 3 times before you get a prescription and get it at the pharmacy. I mean, this has nothing to do, and we need to stop pretending that this has anything at all to do with the safety of the drug or the medical efficacy of the drug. This is entirely about punishing the potential users of the drug. And this is entirely about controlling women. The idea that just judges are making medical decisions for people is beyond the pale. And it looks like the drug manufacturer and the Biden administration are both appealing the decision. The problem, of course, then becomes that the body to which the decision is being appealed is the Christo fascist white supremacist Supreme Court. And there are also a bunch of misogynists too. So the only ray of hope, the only glimmer we have that this might end well, maybe that's overstating it, is that these rulings are so bad that even this illegitimate Supreme Court might reject them. But then again, I don't know if you've read the Dobbs decision. It's egregious, and they don't seem to have any problem with egregiousness or overturning precedent or whatever the case may be, as long as they get their way. So we'll have to see what happens there. Speaking of the Supreme Court, this is not breaking news, but we have even more proof that Clarence Thomas is the most corrupt justice in modern history, and very possibly, although I guess it's hard to judge these things, very possibly the most corrupt justice in all of human history. I mean, the hits just keep on coming with this guy. We've already known that he's been engaged in unethical behavior for forever, pretty much. He never should have been on the court. I mean, that was a debacle that sadly, Democrats, including Joe Biden, need to take some responsibility for. But, as long as the spineless Chief Justice John Roberts is refusing to institute meaningful ethics reform, justices like Thomas are going to continue to behave unethically. I mean, why wouldn't they? They get away with it. This is a theme, a running theme on the right. We see it with Donald. We see it with Republican senators. We see it with Republicans in the House of Representatives. They keep criming. They keep behaving unethically because who is going to dare stop them? Certainly not John Roberts, who, for reasons that only he perhaps knows, has no interest anymore in the legitimacy of his court or of his own reputation. So this is what we've learned recently with Thomas, though, is a little bit different. He's broken the law. As fellow nerd adventure Dahlia Lithwick recently wrote, he broke the law, and it's not even close. There's a bright shining light on his criminality. So to step back for a second, part of the problem here is that, because federal judges have lifetime tenure, they are allegedly insulated from the pressure and corruption of politics. That's the whole point of giving them lifetime tenure. So they are separate and apart from the kinds of incentives to maybe look the other way or make a particular decision that politicians are subject to, right? But all federal judges who aren't Supreme Court justices are required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. That's what it says in the ethics rules. The quote unquote appearance of impropriety. Members of the High Court, according to John Roberts, consult that code for guidance. They don't have to consult anybody else. They just have to consult their own conscience. And, if you're somebody like Samuel Alito or Brett Kavanaugh or Clarence Thomas, you don't have a conscience. So you're not consulting anything. Because basically what Roberts is saying is that all the justices on his court can do whatever the fuck they want and suffer no consequences. So the result, one very significant result, is that there's plummeting public confidence in the court's legitimacy. So Roberts might not care about that, but the rest of us need to, because the Supreme Court is the final arbiter in what kind of country we are and what kind of choices we make. Now, one of the many problems with Clarence Thomas is he's doing much more than his fair share to destroy the court's credibility. So I wanted to leave aside for the moment his most egregious rulings, because you could say that all of his rulings are ineligible because he's illegitimately on the court, but he's on the court. There's nothing we can do about it. And I'm not saying his rulings aren't significant, but that's a slightly different conversation. We know that he's ruled against things like affirmative action, which, as we'll soon learn, is very ironic. Marriage equality, reproductive freedom, privacy. He's ruled for money in politics. He's ruled for the death penalty, for gun manufacturers, and on and on and on. He's just terrible. But I want to focus on his most recent behavior, because this could and should potentially have far-reaching consequences. Last year, Thomas refused to recuse himself from cases that touched on the involvement of his wife and best friend, Ginny, in efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. I don't understand why, on the one hand, he feels that he can remain objective in such cases. But again, back to the big question, why is he the one allowed to make that decision? He's not going to recuse himself under such circumstances. Somebody else certainly should. He was the only Supreme Court justice to dissent when the court rejected Donald's bid to withhold White House documents concerning January 6th. That seemed glaring at the time. And thanks to, well, actually, before I get to ProPublica, we've learned that billionaire real estate mogul Harlan Crow, who will come into play even more significantly in a minute, made a $500,000 contribution to Ginny Thomas's what's called Liberty Central, which I guess is some kind of pro autocracy group that she's aligned with. But the big problem here, it's not just that she's associated with it. That organization paid her $120,000 a year. Okay, so now let's get to ProPublica. Thanks to extraordinary work by some of their journalists, we learned that Thomas has accepted luxury trips almost every year for over 2 decades from said real estate mogul billionaire Harlan Crow. A recent vacation, I find this mind-blowing. A recent vacation included a 9-day island hopping adventure in Indonesia on a super luxury yacht, which included, I'm sure, many staff and a private chef. This trip, if Thomas had had to pay for it out of his own pocket, would have cost him $500,000, $500,000 for one trip. Who lives in that universe? Like Clarence Thomas, as a government official, as a public servant, makes $285,000 a year. And he went on a trip that would have cost anybody paying for it $500,000. We've also learned that in 2014, Crow's companies purchased 2 vacant lots and a house where Thomas's mother, I think, still lives, from Thomas and other family members. And Thomas didn't disclose this deal, which he is legally supposed to do. After the sale, contractors did tens of thousands of dollars of work to, on improvements for the home, including a carport for Mrs. Thomas. Crow also bought other properties on the same residential street in Savannah, Georgia. So after it was discovered that Crow purchased Thomas's mother's home, again, in which she still lives. So I'm not sure why it's better for some guy who's not her son to own it as opposed to her actual son. He said this, and I'm going to quote because it's kind of fascinating quote. My intention is to one day create, he starts off by splitting an infinitive. So that's never good. My intention is to one day create a public museum at the Thomas home dedicated to telling the story of our nation's second Black Supreme Court justice. I approached the Thomas family about my desire to maintain this historic site so future generations could learn about the inspiring life of one of our greatest Americans. I mean, first of all, there's so much wrong with this statement, it's hard to know where to start. His reasoning is deeply flawed. First of all, the idea that Clarence Thomas is one of the greatest Americans is just utterly laughable. He's as corrupt as they come, and he's just sort of an all-around despicable person. But, that's my opinion. But why he needed to buy the home while Thomas's mother was still living in it, I'm pretty sure Clarence Thomas, when the time comes, could also have turned the home and its surroundings into a museum. I don't know. I think there's probably a way to do that. And, if you want to preserve something, you probably don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars updating it. Anyway, the thing here, though, is that the reasons Crow bought it are kind of irrelevant to the fact that Clarence Thomas was obligated to disclose the sale, which, again, he did not do. Now, first of all, do we really think that Harlan Crow billionaire real estate mogul Harlan Crow would be dear friends with Clarence Thomas if the latter weren't a right-wing Supreme Court justice? No, we do not think so. We don't think that that would be the case at all. And even if they were buddies, I don't know that Crow would go out of his way lavishing such expensive gifts upon Clarence Thomas. Let's assume, though, I just want you to, let's do a little thought experiment. Let's pretend that it's okay for a Supreme Court justice to be bought by rich people who may influence his or her future rulings. Obviously, this is not okay, and that's clearly what's happening here, but just for the sake of argument. Is it okay, though, if that massively wealthy friend also collects statues of the 20th century's most horrific mass murderers and collects and displays Nazi memorabilia? What does that say about Harlan Crow's dear friend? And what does it say about today's Supreme Court? We know that John Roberts is going to do nothing. As long as Republicans control the House, there will be no impeachment hearings into any of this. So that leaves it up to Joe Biden and Senate Democrats. First, I think, we've unfortunately been hearing about public demands for Senator Dianne Feinstein to step down. She has been out of D.C. for a couple of months now. She's missed many, many votes. I've something like 60 out of 80 votes. She got a very bad case of shingles. She's in her late 80s. But you know what, guys? This is not something that should be done publicly. There are ways to handle this privately. It just makes everybody involved look bad. But there were significant downsides to her. We have a 50-50 majority in the Senate right now. The only reason we have a majority is because, thankfully, Kamala Harris is vice president, and she can cast a deciding vote in the event of 50-50 ties. But in terms of the judiciary itself, she sits on that committee, and we can't get any judges confirmed without her vote. So she has agreed to step down temporarily to be replaced. I think that requires a 60 vote majority, which means that we might end up with somebody horrible like Kirsten Sinema. I don't know. I mean, hopefully Democrats will figure out what to do. But in that event, the wrong person for the job is the current chair of the judiciary, Dick Durbin. He needs to go. He's proven time and time again that he's worse than useless. He's refusing to get rid of blue slips, which are basically just courtesies. In other words, if let's say the Democrats right now are in charge of nominating and confirming judges. So let's say there's an opening in an appeals court or in a circuit court in Alabama, right? The Democrats are, of course, going to pick somebody who is acceptable to Democrats. Either one of the Republican senators in Alabama can hand in a blue slip, which means that they reject that nomination. So basically, if you're in a state, if you're in a party, right? If you're a senator in a party different from the party in charge, you can make it impossible for the party in charge to nominate the judges that party prefers. And Dick Durbin, who could get rid of the blue slip, refuses to do that. So he needs to go. We need somebody who's going to play hardball. And Joe Biden needs to expand the court. There are no arguments against that at this point. Things are so bad. Because not only is Clarence Thomas the most corrupt justice who is every day making decisions that affect hundreds of millions of Americans. The Roberts Court is an illegitimate court. It's out of control, and it's legislating from the bench. We need to put a stop to this. So expanding the court is the only way to rein in the corruption of this illegitimate, extremist, Christian nationalist majority, which shouldn't even be on the court in the first place. So expanding the court really is the only way forward, because only that will stop the Roberts Court as yet unfettered assault on American democracy. And those are the terms in which we need to see this and their actions and Roberts' inactions. So that's the wrap for this week. Everybody needs to take the entire weekend off. That's my that's my assessment. So yeah, we're gonna keep doing this every week, and hopefully, again, the goal isn't to overwhelm you with bad news, but to understand like what's going on and what the possibilities. There are potentials for change here. We just need to figure out how to affect it and how to get the people who have the power to affect the change to listen to us and to have the courage and to understand where we are in this game right now. So it was great to have you here. We will, of course, be back on Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific with the Nerd Avengers, as always. And I think Waj will be back. He's been working really hard. He's also been celebrating Ramadan, which, takes a toll. So it'll be great to have him back. And just as a reminder to you, Jen Rubin at the Washington Post, fellow Nerd Avenger, is starting her newsletter today. So I strongly encourage you to sign up for that. And we'll be back with the wrap next Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Do not forget, we are taking our show on the road. The Mary Trump Show with a couple of surprise Nerd Avengers and a surprise special guest will be at the House of Blues in Chicago on May 7th, Cobb's Comedy Club on May 9th in San Francisco. May 10th will be at the Aladdin Theater in Portland, Oregon. And on May 16th, in my hometown of New York City, we will be at the Gramercy Theater. You can go to politicon.com/tour to get your tickets. We would love to see you there. It is going to be a blast. We did this in LA back in December. We had such a great time. And, this time around, it's going to be even better because we know what we're doing now. So again, please, it would be fantastic to have you all join us. Have an amazing weekend. Seriously, unplug, relax, chill out. Do whatever you need to do. And we will see you back here on Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Almost forgot. You can listen to the show in podcast form anywhere you get your podcast. So 5-star reviews, very much appreciated. Helps other people find the show. That is it for the wrap today. Thanks again for being here. See you Tuesday. Have a great weekend. In the meantime, please stay safe and be kind.